Yes, it was a shutout victory, 31-0 over Iowa. Yes, it was a historic win with Penn State doing something they haven't done from the 90s. But Penn State has a lot of bigger things ahead of them on the schedule, including the way that it breaks for Ohio State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a live post-game show for Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day we are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Wearing all white to kind of go with the whiteout because since I don't go as a fan anymore, I guess this is my way of trying to express that. Yes, I do like Penn State. That's why I do this show, right? I am a Nittany Lions fan at heart here. Bring him back from happyvalleyinsider.com, Dylan Callaghan-Croley, to talk just for the opening segment, but this postgame show is going to go over the course of close to an hour. Zane Brancefield will be joining us in the second half of the show. But we're talking everything, big picture stuff to start, and then going back through and talking about Iowa and then Northwestern. Just get some initial thoughts on the Wildcats with myself and Zane. But Dylan, this is something we broke down initially with the instant recap we did in the tunnel of Beaver Stadium since they didn't let us on the field. It was, yes, 31-0 is very impressive, but Penn State, we joked about it, that Penn State essentially has 3 bye weeks before going into Ohio State. Northwestern, I get it. It's on the road. It's a Big Ten game, but come on, Northwestern is just not, they are not as competitive as they need to be. And then you do have a literal bye week where you can rest and you just work on it. You just practice and you work on the little things. And then you got UMass, and UMass, from an analytics standpoint, ranks as 130th or around there. Some places have them 128th. I'm not going to split hairs. They are close to 130th when it comes to FBS teams. So right now, Penn State has 3 weeks where they can fine-tune some things and, more importantly, save their best plays, save all of their energy, try to remain as healthy as possible, get the backups in, get them valuable reps before they go to Columbus and play the Ohio State Buckeyes in what ultimately could be a top 5 showdown.
Yeah, after this week going forward, moving on to 4-0 on the season, Penn State. I mean, not to be mean to Northwestern and UMass, but based off what we've seen out of Penn State for 4 weeks, and what we've seen out of those other 2 teams, Penn State essentially has 3 weeks here where they don't really need to do anything. They haven't had to do anything special all year, but they still don't have to do anything special. They could legitimately put out their second team for the entirety of Northwestern and UMass and still probably win.
And win.
Yeah. Northwestern, they'd still win by double digits at least, and UMass, they'd still win in blowout fashion. I mean, in a way, it's 3 bye weeks for Penn State. Like, yeah, you got to respect the opponent on the other side, and Penn State's not going to treat it like 3 bye weeks. But if Northwestern and UMass is close, I mean, we don't even need to talk about Ohio State or Michigan, because if those 2 games are close, there's no chance Penn State beats Ohio State or Michigan.
Yeah.
Penn State really just over the next 3 weeks, obviously they have the bye week, so the next 2 games really just need to come out, play their game, stay healthy, not try to do anything special, just get in and out with a win. If they do that, they should win both of these games by 35 points plus. I mean, this Northwestern team, I know they just beat Minnesota last night, but this is not a good Northwestern team. This is a team that Penn State should absolutely dominate against, much like they did against Iowa on Saturday night. If Iowa can only have 75 total yards in this game, what is Northwestern going to have? I mean, I'm sure they'll somehow find a way to break 100, which will make Iowa's performance on Saturday night all the more hilarious. But I mean, this is shaping up for Penn State to really just, use the next 3 weeks to clean up the little things, get everything going in full gear. So when you arrive in Columbus on October 21st at, I'm assuming that'll be at 12 p.m., but as soon as they walk into Ohio Stadium for kickoff on October 21st, they can go head-to-head with the now number 4 ranked Buckeyes.
Yeah, for Penn State, I think the most important thing is the two things, right? Yes, there is hiding plays and because that's what Michigan's doing, right?
Yeah.
Michigan isn't overly dominating, and this is something just outside, just kind of bantering about college football, which is a good thing that we got the chance to do being at Beaver Stadium together, Dylan. And Michigan's not overly dominating opponents. Penn State, to an extent, they dominated Delaware, yes, but that's because that's an FCS team. But you walked away from West Virginia, okay, it was good enough. You walked away from Illinois, okay, it was good enough. Iowa was that statement victory. You still feel like maybe there was a little more that could have been added on top of it, but it was still enough because they aren't establishing the ground game that you would like them to. The explosive plays still aren't there, and it's like, okay, where are they? I haven't watched too much Michigan football. I'm not deep diving into the tape because we're not at the Wolverines yet. But looking at box scores, looking at highlights, seeing what JJ McCarthy, Blake Corum, and the rest of them are doing, the team, and it's like, well, Michigan isn't overly dominant like they normally are. They're doing the exact same thing Penn State is here, biding their time, conserving plays. When you go into games like Delaware, UMass, and even a Northwestern, you are not taking your best playbook with you. That's just the fact of the matter. I've even talked to high school coaches about this, and they say, yes, when we know that we're playing in an inferior opponent, we are not deep. We are not going into the extended part of the playbook. It is very vanilla. We're taking basic plays because we have to save things for games where we know we're going to need them to win. And that's exactly what Penn State's doing right here. So I'll say this about the ground game specifically. I am not worried about Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen having all the explosive plays. Oh, there's no 80-yard touchdowns. Katron Allen isn't breaking open for 40, 50-yard plays down the field. Those are going to come in due time. It's chess, not checkers. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I think Penn State is working on because right now it is a little weak. The interior ground game is not good. Am I worried about it, though? No, because I think they can continue to improve it and fix it against teams like UMass, Northwestern, and then the actual physical bye week so that it is ready for Columbus, so that it is ready to host Michigan in November when those games make or break your season. Okay. Northwestern, UMass do not make or break your season. Don't lose to them because then your season's completely broken and shattered to pieces. But you don't even have to imagine a scenario where that happens. I get it. It's out in Evanston. It's a conference matchup. Never say never, never on any given Saturday, any given Sunday. But I think Penn State, it's just Northwestern and UMass are so far back right now, just where their programs are. And I credit to Massachusetts for the way they're trying to rebuilding, bringing in Coach Brown, and then Northwestern just trying to keep it all together. Coach David Braun just doing what he can with what he has available to him. I respect both programs and their ongoing rebuild. It's going to be a long ongoing rebuild at that. But for Penn State, this is the time. Get your backups in because you can get the true freshmen acclimated. Those guys who have played reserve roles for 1 or 2 years now, get them acclimated because at a moment's notice, Dylan, they might have to go in against Ohio State and they better be prepared.
Yeah, and that's what these next couple of weeks are really about, just building that depth. I mean, we've seen Penn State every week now. Bo Perbeel has gotten snaps. I mean, I don't know if we expected that. I mean, to do it 1 week against like West Virginia, sure, at the end there, sure. But to do it on the road against Illinois and then do it against Iowa, one of the better defenses you're going to face all season, very impressed for Penn State. Now, against Northwestern UMass, Bo Perbeel, that second-team offense, that second-team defense, guys like Tony Rojas, King Mack, all those freshmen, all the redshirt freshmen should get a ton of playing time against Northwestern UMass, which is only going to help against Ohio State, against Michigan.
I'm thinking of the offensive line too. Javen Williams, Anthony Donko, maybe a Chimney Ono. We still haven't seen Alex Birchmeyer, but I'm not going to read too much into that. but the true freshman offensive lineman who could go in at a moment's notice. And
Yep.
this is one of the most deep offensive lines that Penn State has had, but depth can change very quickly. As we saw a season ago, Olu Fashanu becomes unavailable. Caden Wallace is in and out of the lineup. Sal Wormley's forced to play with bumps and bruises. Hunter Norzad has bumps and bruises. I'm already naming 4 players who are on this offensive line, have dealt with that injury history. And I'm not, knock on wood desk, so I don't like to speak it into existence. But Penn State knows this. Penn State has had that trial and error when they went out to Kinnick Stadium, where they played against Iowa, and they didn't have Taquan Roberson. I'm not saying that James Franklin was stubborn and saying, no, we can never play our backup quarterback because that's not the way to do things. And I'm not saying he had this big change of heart, but you also have to be in a position where your players do need to be able to show that they are prepared enough. So the reason these backups are getting into games is because they've earned it. It's not the Taquan Roberson probably didn't earn it at that point in time, even before Iowa, because why wasn't he getting more in-game action? We already knew what Sean Clifford could do after 4 or 5 years with the program. So that kind of speaks volumes now that Penn State is getting the backups who are prepared to play because they're putting them in the game, not because they have to, but because they can, because they've earned it.
Yeah, and I think what's the best way to put it is, I mean, Franklin over the last few years, the last year or so, has been saying it's better to get your second team in there, your third team in there, and get those guys reps, get them competitive football, even if it means you give up the shutout. Getting that development time is
They didn't give up they didn't give them the shutout this time.
They didn't give up the shutout this time. They did not. But getting that development time is much more crucial to the program's success than the ego of trying to keep that shutout intact or whatever it may be. Obviously, that was they were able to do both against Iowa for the most part. Didn't get the backups a ton of time, especially on the defense side of the ball.
On defense, right.
But they got them still a couple reps, which over the course of the season, those reps add up to quality amount of playing time, probably, over the course of the season, a game or so of time for these younger guys, which is big. But yeah, I definitely think he definitely probably changed his philosophy a little bit after that game a couple years ago in Iowa, just because before that we didn't really see Penn State go to the younger quarterbacks much. I think it was before that Iowa game, they faced Indiana at home, and they defeated Indiana 28-0. But the game was out of reach in the third quarter, and I kept wondering myself, why isn't Taquan Roberson getting more time in this game? Get him some valuable snaps, because God forbid if something would have happened to Sean Clifford, which something did happen to Sean Clifford, Taquan Roberson had to be ready to go, to step in and be able to move the offense. And when Clifford did get hurt, they had to go to Roberson, who had minimum experience, and it cost them a game in Iowa City. If they have Roberson more prepared heading into that game, they still may end up winning that game. And who knows how that season would have progressed after that, because they clearly, weren't confident Roberson going up against Illinois that year. So they put up a banged up Sean Clifford at quarterback, healthy enough to play, but obviously not healthy enough to move around. And that cost them that game. But I definitely think that injury to Clifford and how that impacted that season definitely changed Franklin's philosophy and how he wants to get these younger guys experience. And in college football, the depth is where you win and lose national championships.
Yeah, it certainly is. I don't think it was a complete change of heart, but it was a change in philosophy, because Drew Aller, there was a blueprint of how they wanted to bring him up as the next quarterback, the next face of the offense. But I also think it is, if you haven't earned it on the practice field, you're just not going to get in the game. Okay. Malik McLean, for an instance here, I don't think he saw an offensive snap against Iowa here. And that might have something. He didn't show up on that injury report that is now mandatory. James Franklin has to say who's available, who's not on an injury report for the game. But he didn't have any impact plays for sure. He didn't have any targets. He might have snuck out there for 1 or 2 snaps, but the play was not designed to him. And I wonder if that has to do something. Did he have a bad week of practice? But that's what I'm saying. Penn State is not going to put players out on the football field if they haven't earned it. And those true freshmen are showing behind the scenes that they have.
Yeah, he was out there just for 3 passing snaps yesterday. So Malik McLean, we saw him look good the first 2 weeks, had those drops last week against, or now 2 weeks ago against Illinois. And now this week, he had just 3 snaps offensively. Was he a little banged up? Who knows? We won't find out until maybe he pops up on an injury report. But yeah, absolutely agree with your statement there about how these guys haven't earned it on the practice field. They're not going to get that experience in game. And I absolutely 100% agree with you that it's not a change of heart because it was that. You would just be throwing out all the young guys out there just to get them experience. You still have to earn that playing time. And those who earn it, if they do well, they earn more playing time. If you do, you do poor and you don't show improvement on that over the course of the next few weeks, you lose that playing time.
Dylan, always appreciate the time, especially in this opening segment here on a live post-game show. Thanks for joining me, and always good to see you at Beaver Stadium for any Penn State home game.
Absolutely. I'll see you soon, Zach.
All right, Dylan Callaghan-Croley from HappyValleyInsider.com, Penn State rivals. Now, still more to come on this live post-game show in just a moment. But first, let's hear from one of our sponsors of today's episode, and that is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It is easy to post a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Add your job and then the purple hiring frame to let people know that you are in fact hiring, to spread your word. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills, just the right experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. And Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Check them out for all the latest. Dylan Callaghan-Croley coming over from HappyValleyInsider.com, Penn State rivals, and the recruiting news as well that's come along with this now. DJ McClary committing, 4-star linebacker, class of 2025. Penn State projects to land a class of 2025 4-star running back in Tyke Hayes, and that his commitment actually comes tomorrow, Monday, September 25th. So Penn State, good, exciting things are coming for Penn State football. But back to just next 3 weeks are so valuable for Penn State, and the way that it sets up for the showdown in Columbus, in the Horseshoe, the showdown in the shoe, right? The Nittany Lions and the Buckeyes know that this is going to be a top 5 matchup, and it should be. And Penn State has been in situations before. 2021 was a top 5 matchup for Iowa and Penn State. Now, those seasons completely changed after that game. Iowa was no longer a top 5 team. Penn State certainly wasn't a top 5 team. But now they're in a situation where Penn State doesn't have to go into – there aren't any struggle fests. There aren't going to be a lot of games. They're not going to be a stretch of games where Penn State has to go in and it's like, you're going to get banged up pretty rough. There's going to be bumps and bruises. Let's think of back in 2016 and the way that Penn State – they lost to Pitt. They lost to Michigan, and they took some major injuries. And part of that was they didn't have the guys they needed available for that Michigan game. I know that was a 40-10 outcome. I don't remember the exact score, but they didn't have the players available. And what I'm getting at is here, those guys returned for the game against Ohio State when the Buckeyes were number 2, the whiteout game, and one of the greatest finishes in Penn State, in a Penn State football game in recent memory. And look what happened. So there are none of those bump and bruiser type of games. Penn State can bide its time, be strategic against Northwestern on the road. You have the bye week in the middle. Then you have UMass. And UMass is just, like I said, they're the 130th best team in the FBS right now. Northwestern made a statement by beating Minnesota That is very impressive that the Wildcats got a win. I didn't think they would get more than my over-under was set at 0.5 because they play Howard. Okay. I did not think the Wildcats would do any better than 1-11. So kudos to them for proving the doubters wrong, like myself, proving the haters wrong. They do have some fight in them. It's mostly the same team. It's the entire same staff. The only difference is Pat Fitzgerald. So that could, they're going to play Penn State physical. They're going to try to break out of the stops. That's a kitchen sink type of game for the Wildcats. But what it ultimately means for Penn State here is that they are still significantly better than the Minutemen and the Wildcats. You don't have to get the extended playbook. You can save some things. Michigan's doing the exact same thing because Michigan exploded against Penn State, against Ohio State last season to beat both teams who finished top 10. The Buckeyes made the college football playoff. Penn State dominated Utah in the Rose Bowl, and Michigan kind of looked like they were sleepwalking their way into the game against the Nittany Lions. And then the Buckeyes, well, they haven't really overly dominated anybody. Penn State can do the exact same thing. And that is a privilege for them. So when I look at the ground game, for an example, the explosive plays, well, they're not there. That's because Penn State is trying to continue to work on the interior inside zone. Hunter Norzad is playing center for the first time. Vanga Ioane or JB Nelson, whoever's at left guard, is a first-time starter for Penn State. Sal Wormley, on the other hand, I think Sal Wormley is a good player, but I'd like to see him get better. The three of them together still have to build some chemistry because they haven't had all the playing time together. And then when you cycle Ioane in from left to right and everything else, you kind of break up that chemistry a little bit. We've seen Penn State have more success with the outside zone. Why aren't they running it? Why aren't they running outside zone when they had a lot of success with it with Bo Pribula, Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, any of them? When they run outside the tackles, they seem to be doing pretty well because Olu Fashanu and Caden Wallace right now are the best offensive linemen that Penn State has to offer. As a group collectively, look at them in pass protection. Their pass protection is phenomenal. I would say probably some of the best in the Big Ten. When Drew Aller gets a pocket, I know he's been great at shifting around and moving in the pocket. Aller gets a lot of credit for staying upright and not taking unnecessary sacks, unnecessary quarterback pressures and hits. For a guy who's not a track star, he's pretty mobile within the pocket in the way he's able to quickly move around and avoid defensive linemen. But besides the point, when he doesn't have to face that kind of pressure, the pass protection for Penn State offense on the offensive line is phenomenal, and I have nothing but great things to say about it. But the inside zone running, not good. I'd give it a D grade, maybe even an F, because Penn State isn't having those explosive plays up the middle. But why do they continue to keep doing it? It's like, seriously, the definition of insanity. Mike Yursich, Coach Franklin, what are you trying to accomplish here? And it's because they're trying to work out the little nuts and bolts, the kinks, to make sure that it's better prepared, because you are going to need an inside ground game. You are going to need, you're going to have more instances of 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 2, and you're going to have to be able to turn to that and have it as an option along with your variety of plays. So I like that Penn State is doing what it needs to do right now to win, with concealing things for the long term. You can still do that against Northwestern. You have the bye week, and then you have UMass. It's not like Penn State is playing, let's take an example of a Maryland game. I think the Terrapins are going to be tougher. They're undefeated. That's a road game this season in College Park. Not saying they lose to Maryland, but that's a game where you get some bumps and bruises. Maryland's going to play you pretty physical. They see Penn State as a rival. Nittany Lions might not think that, but the Terrapins certainly do. They canceled classes for games, for crying out loud, when they weren't on the level playing field. Well, the playing field is a little more even than it has been in the past. You can rip me apart in the comments. That's fine. But I hope you're understanding my point, is that Penn State doesn't have any overly physical games where they're going to need to have players play more snaps, play more minutes, overextend their usage. That's why James Franklin has been so key, has made it a plan, a point of emphasis, to have Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen split as many reps as possible, because you preserve the tread on the tires. Running backs can easily get worn out. If you're a bell cow, you can lose that longevity by taking so many unnecessary hits. When you have two guys as talented as Allen and Singleton, and you don't miss a beat when one of them is on the field, and it's coming pretty soon, both of them are going to be on the field more often. And we could see that against Ohio State. We could see that again. We will see that against Ohio State. We will see that against Michigan. That's what I'm saying. Penn State gets to conceal the playbook. They can avoid some unnecessary, just overextending some players. They benched Hunter Norzad and Olu Fashanu halfway through the Delaware game. I'm not saying that's going to be the case against Northwestern and UMass, but think about that again going into the fourth quarter. Penn State doesn't need to see what Olu Fashanu can do when Penn State is up 35-0 against Northwestern on the road. Sorry, that's not a prove it moment for Fashanu, Norzad, or frankly, any of those other veterans too. And they've already seen that with Drew Aller. They get Bo Prabula in right away, even though I think Drew Aller should frankly be out there since he's only started 4 games to this point. But let's check in on the comments. I've said a lot. I've rambled a lot. These takeaways are kind of in combination of what's to come and with Iowa. But let's check out the comments. The comments are a lot of spam here, actually. But we do have one, and I appreciate that. We'll ignore the spam and we'll talk about this. Great win, 31-0 was the same score in our road opener against Iowa at Iowa City in 1993. Grinded out mode will probably be the same plan against Ohio State and Michigan. We need to start making EBPs. Thank you for the comment. I think that's IV or maybe LV Warrior 1416. I'll talk about the grinded out mentality actually, because this is something that I pointed out on previous podcasts, on live post-game shows actually. For Penn State, they now have this capability that they didn't have before, at least in 2020 and 2021. Winnable games that Penn State, frankly, they have a closer now, right? A closing pitcher in baseball. They have a closing mentality. They can grind the defense because the 2 defenses that they have played, Illinois and Iowa, they give you yards. They take away the big plays. Even Delaware, they take away the big plays, but I'm not going to include Delaware in this since they're an FCS team. But for Iowa and Illinois specifically, 2 Big Ten opponents that Penn State beat convincingly. Iowa a little more so than Illinois, but I think when you beat a Big Ten opponent on the road like that, still you do deserve a lot more credit than people are giving you. But Penn State able to run the football, sustain drives. We saw in 2020 and 2021. I know 2020 was a distant memory. It wasn't a real season, and a lot of things were lost in that instance. We know that. But from an X's and O's standpoint, from the game of football, game planning, and everything else, Penn State did not have the capability to sustain drives. They were quickly on and off the field, 3 and out. That had to do with Noah Kane getting hurt. That had to do with Journey Brown having the health conditions, the offensive line not being as good as it is now, not being as deep. Depth combined, it's strictly depth, but also the talent that you had available to you. Penn State upgraded that talent. And at quarterback, at running back, you have a quarterback that has not turned the ball over to this point and has barely put it in harm's way also. Other than the dropped interception against West Virginia, what bad pass has Drew Aller made? Yes, he's thrown it out of bounds. Yes, he's thrown it into the turf, but that's by design. Where has he put the football in harm's way? That is one key. He is incredible at protecting the football. Running backs aren't putting the football on the ground, barely, right? They did have a couple of loose, but there were some fumbles, but Penn State able to jump back on them. They have not turned the football over to this point. They were doing that in 2020, 2021. They weren't sustaining drives. They were quickly on the football field, 3 and out. They couldn't run effectively on first down. They were throwing bubble screens. That's a thing of the past. Penn State is able to grind out these opponents that have defenses that are okay. They're not good at defending yardage. They'll give up the first 90 yards on the football field, but then they get inside the red zone, and then they are really good. Backs against the wall, they're able to turn you away. Penn State tired Illinois out. They tired Iowa out. And they can do that if they get the lead against the Buckeyes. They have that capability. They can do that against the Wolverines because Penn State should have won that game in 2021 against Michigan, but they couldn't close it out. They had the lead, 17-14 going into the fourth quarter. Why didn't they win that game? I know a lot of other reasons, but the offense couldn't grind the Wolverines defense out, and they should have ruined that college football playoff season in Beaver Stadium on that day, but they didn't. Now they can't. And that's the biggest difference with this Penn State team and a huge takeaway. Penn State continued to make Iowa's defense miserable. Iowa didn't help itself out because Cade McNamara and the team and Brian Ferentz's offense couldn't stay on the field. So Penn State said, okay, we're just going to tire out your defense since you want to keep giving us the dink and dunk, and we'll sustain 8-minute drives. That's killer for a defense. And Penn State has certainly come a long way with in the past few years so quickly. right? This is something that for 5-6 years programs have to build, and Penn State did it like that in a matter of 2 seasons with Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, all the other complementary pieces on offense that they have in the fold. And that's what I really like to see. So we do have another comment. I'm taking your comments on the live show. This is your post-game show. We want to hear from you to discuss these things. And then from Time for Penn, I assume if we can't win at Ohio State this year, hard to see when it will happen. This Penn State team is the most talented team since 1994. And part of it is mental and coaching. And I hope we're ready. Thanks for the comment. I think Ohio State, now they did beat Notre Dame. They did beat Notre Dame. But I still think that Penn State has gained ground on Ohio State. Ohio State has taken somewhat of a small step back, but I think it does. I think it bodes well for the Nittany Lions, and I think they can beat them in Columbus. I really do. Drew Aller's better than Kyle McCord. Singleton and Allen, honestly, I like Travion Henderson a lot, but those two backfields are very comparable. Ohio State's offensive line is not the same that it's been in the past. And let's take a look at the Buckeyes schedule because I'd like to know where they are going to be and what teams they're going to face before they get to Penn State. Okay, because they are coming off a Notre Dame game. That's a bumps and bruises type of game, right? It's 17-14, a high-profile primetime game. Maryland on Saturday, October 7th. Okay, so they get a bye week here, it looks like. They're going to get a bye week, and so a similar setup for Penn State. But Maryland, tougher than Northwestern and UMass, and then they're on the road at Purdue, so they got to travel 1 week before. At least Penn State gets the bye week, a home game against UMass, and then they got to go to Columbus. Purdue's not going to mess around. Ryan Walters is a Big Ten coach. He was the reason that Illinois' defense was so good a season ago. Penn State, I think, has a slightly better setup than the Buckeyes. You're coming off of Notre Dame, Maryland, who is going to be a top 25 team, I think, when at the end of the season. And then Purdue on the road, I think, is a little more difficult than Northwestern, the bye week, and UMass. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But for Penn State, it is the perfect setup. You can do what Ohio State and Michigan have been doing for quite some time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You don't have to be worried about it. You can play it as I get 1-0 mentality. I totally understand, but come on. You are not using the same playbook against Northwestern that you have scheduled out for Ohio State and Michigan. You're just not. You don't need to get that creative with the Wildcats and the Minutemen. You can argue it if you want. That's fine, but I don't think that's the case. So we still have some other things to observe from Iowa. Not everything was perfect, but we're going to discuss that coming up on the live postgame show, and then some more in-depth thoughts on Northwestern. Well, let's hear from another one of our sponsors on today's episode, and that is Athletic Brewing. Athletic Brewing is changing the game when it comes to non-alcoholic beers. So it's fitting that we give you a game changer on the football field for the Penn State Nittany Lions. And the game changer is brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. And my game changer is Chop Robinson of the Penn State Nittany Lions defense. Chop Robinson getting a lot of pressures from the analytics standpoint is an absolute monster, but it hasn't shown up too much in the box score until the game against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Multiple sacks, getting pressure on Cade McNamara, and Penn State's defense as a whole could even be a game changer with the 4 forced fumbles, while the 3 of them, and then you had the one on special teams, Curtis Jacobs as well. Really, Penn State's defense has been a game changer over the past 2 weeks. And like Penn State's defense, Athletic Brewing is changing the game for non-alcoholic beers. They make beers, non-alcoholic beers, that are actually tasty and are well-crafted, and they taste just like a full-strength beer, but they're non-alcoholic. They brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beers, including IPAs, Goldens, sours, and more. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you, or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use promo code Locked On to get 15% off your first online order. That's code Locked On at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. And just to briefly wrap up this first part of the live post-game show, we're going to have the second half of it. Zane Brancefield, who's been helping me out with the show, the podcast, is going to be joining me again to talk about Iowa a little more in depth and then some initial thoughts on Northwestern. But Penn State getting the shutout victory over Iowa, 31-0, to do something they haven't done. They shut out a ranked opponent for the first time since the 90s. This Penn State defense is different. That's why I'm glad I see these comments of people finally admitting, some people have before, but now it's starting to catch up, that this Penn State team is just as good as the national title contenders from the 90s, from the 80s. They have all the depth in the world. The most important part is the continuity with the coaching staff. There's no disconnect. Players aren't having to learn a new system, build chemistry with new coaches. I get Dion Barnes. Nice thing that he is able to come over and stay with the staff, basically graduate to the defensive line coach position. He's been a Penn State football player himself, right? He knows and understands the culture. But Marcus Hagans comes in, adjusts right away, but there's no new defensive coordinator, brand new offense, right? Guys who are integral parts of the coaching staff that Penn State hasn't had to replace like in years past. And that's a more or less a good thing, right? Because it means that James Franklin and his staff are really, they're building a coaching tree, guys to go on to their next stop, their next spot. I get that. But now Penn State had that continuity with Mike Yurcich, Manny Diaz, James Franklin, all working together, and then the players being a part of that too. So then the new players come in, and the veterans who have been there, they all have to adjust at the same time. And then there's that lag. They're behind a little bit. And then they start to figure it out as the season goes along, like Penn State's defense last year. Penn State's defense, a little, not that Manny Diaz style we were anticipating. And then they started to turn it on as the middle of the season, and then later on in the season as it went along. Okay, because they make adjustments and they learn. Now that's all here. All of that was last year. Now you're in 2023, and the fruits of your labor are being sowed here by James Franklin. 31-0 shutout victory. I teased it. I didn't think they would do it, but I certainly thought it was a possibility that they were going to shut out Iowa's offense, because Iowa's offense is not that good, and Penn State's defense is really good, especially when they're healthy. Okay, and Penn State is doing the right things by getting the true freshmen, the younger players into the game in case opportunities unfold where they least expect to see them. Ohio State, Michigan. But they're in a situation now where they can be strategic with how many snaps players are playing, what plays they are calling against Northwestern and UMass. And that's really that all needs to be said here to conclude the first part of the post-game show. So let's jump over to the second part of the post-game show. Penn State defeats Iowa 31-0. The Hawkeyes seem to have little to no resistance there whatsoever, but I think it's more so the fact that Penn State was just that dominant.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am Zach Seyko, your host, joined now by Zane Brancefield, who is helping out the show this season. And before we move any further, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, Zane, you were there as a fan, so you kind of got a different perspective out of this. But Penn State really doing a good job. I don't think it's that because Iowa was a top 25 team, and they could finish as a top 25 team. But Penn State has now put itself into the tier with Michigan and Ohio State. That was my biggest takeaway, is the fact that if you look at this Iowa game, Penn State is now in the same conversation. They have to beat them still. I get it. It doesn't matter. Well, we're in the same category, but you want to be able to get over the mountaintop, not to the mountaintop. And that's where Penn State is right now. They are at the mountaintop. They got to get over the mountaintop, which is Ohio State and Michigan this season, or this season's all for a lost cause here. But they dominated Iowa, not because Iowa is lackluster, but because Penn State is just that much better, and they are a college football playoff contender. They're not a pretender. They are a contender this season.
And I think the other big thing about that is like Penn State went out there and dominated by doing simple plays. It wasn't like they did anything extravagant.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
They played simple football. Like we didn't have any super long plays. Allard just threw it to Lambert Smith or Theo Johnson, whoever was just wide open. Maybe for like the longest I think we had was like a 33-yard play, and that was late in the game. And so it was like those simple like little first down plays and even getting 5 yards at a time. If that's how Penn State's going to win and keep our guys healthy, like we haven't seen a lot from Nick Singleton this season. He hasn't been as hot as what he was last year. Same with Katron Allen.
Yeah.
But the fact that Penn State has those weapons and knows what they are capable of just shows that when Penn State goes to play Ohio State or Michigan, or even like in the national playoff like race against those guys, Penn State's going to take off because people don't realize how good Penn State's offense is because they are keeping it on the down low. They're not showing everybody what they're capable of really like getting at. And the fact that Iowa is that good of a team and let Penn State score 31 points and the defense didn't give up anything for Penn State, like I think that just shows Penn State can be that good. And people don't realize that this is just like a portion of what Penn State's capable of.
Yeah, the Hawkeyes I think they are a top 3 defense in the Big Ten. I really do. I think I would go Penn State, Michigan, and then Iowa. Frankly, I really would. Ohio State actually did impress me against Notre Dame. So maybe I'm just trying to be as biased as I can against the Buckeyes here, but the Hawkeyes do have a good defense. It's because they have a bad offense. I will criticize Brian Ferentz's offense left and right. Kirk Ferentz has got to find a way to just casually just give your son the pink slip. Okay. Just do it. It won't bother anybody. And Iowa fans certainly know how bad it is. They want Brian Ferentz gone. They even want Kirk Ferentz gone, some of them as well. But it's a symmetrical type of relationship, Zane. If your offense, and that's why Penn State's defense in 2021 was actually really good, really talented, had a lot of NFL players in the making on that group, and they were coached by Brent Pry. But when you constantly you're bent, eventually you're gonna break. And that's what happened. Penn State's offense is so good this season at sustaining drives. They can play physical, they can play finesse, they can go over the top, they can go underneath. It doesn't matter. Penn State's offense is dynamic in ways that it hasn't been since the prime Joe Moorhead years when they had Trace McSorley, Saquon Barkley, Chris Godwin, right? All the Mike Gesicki, all those guys, 2016 and 2017. Ricky Ronnie's offenses were good, but they weren't Joe Moorhead's, and they certainly aren't this version of Mike Yurcich's. So Penn State's defense benefits from that as well. They're well rested. They can go over the game plan a little more. Whereas Iowa's defense, from a talent standpoint and an execution standpoint, yes, they are top 3 in the Big Ten. They're top 20 in the nation. Argue with me about it. I don't care. But when your defense is constantly out on the football field, eventually you're going to give up points. And that's what happened. Eventually, Iowa gave up points. They made their stops. And early in the game, it was pretty close. It's like, all right, Penn State really isn't jumping out to an advantage. But this is why the game's played over 4 quarters and not just the one. Because to start for the first 10 minutes, yeah, Penn State and Iowa, it was pretty close. And then Penn State is able to wear you down. The offense isn't helping you out because it's quickly 3 and out off the field. And then the defense is like, man, we got to put our helmets back on and try to stop a well-oiled machine that Penn State is. Penn State isn't just good at sustaining drives. They are good at that. But then they have the talent to take the top off and have the big plays when they need them. But they're just deciding that they don't need them at this point. They want to do that. And James Franklin pointed that out in his press conference yesterday. He said, I had to tell Mike Yurcich, not specifically this, hey, Mike, don't get bored, but remind him, hey, use these plays. Don't kind of sit back because Iowa will, they're still a good football team. They will try to do things to get back into the game, but don't give them a reason to. And I think that's what James Franklin was saying when Iowa's defense can bore you to sleep. And that's when they prey on those instances of your lack of sightedness. Okay. When you don't see the football game as clearly because, hey, we are getting kind of bored. We are getting lulled to sleep. And James Franklin and Mike Yurcich together are doing a good job of making sure that wasn't the case, at least in this instance.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because Penn State's offense had the ball for 45 minutes out there,
Yeah.
which is ridiculous. It's like,
Almost 100 plays ran by Penn State.
yeah, and like
97.
there's nothing else Iowa can do. Like if somebody has the ball for that long, they're bound to score at some point. But 31 is crazy, especially for that Iowa defense. But they just get tired. Like you said, like Iowa try to tire Penn State out. Well, Penn State has so much depth that's not going to do anything. We have guys to the third string who are just as good as the starters at some positions. And so Penn State's able to do that. And it's like the only time Penn State was really slow was at the beginning of the game. We had 4 punts the whole game, which yeah, like we could get that number down, but 4 punts is not bad at all. And Penn State's going to continue to keep dominating like this. They came out slow. They wanted Iowa to think they were in the game, and then they punched them in the face. And that's going to happen every week. And Penn State, like I think the only games Penn State comes out red hot throwing the ball deep because Drew Allar wasn't throwing the ball much that first drive when we got the ball. And so Penn State's going to come out hot against like Michigan, Ohio State because they have to strike first to get on the board. But like against these next couple opponents, Northwestern, UMass, Penn State might not score even until the second quarter because you got to make it seem like they're still in the game. Let the guys rest and then go out there and let them cook. And Penn State's going to continue to do that and show why they are a top team. And I think Penn State is going to eventually like keep working their way up in the rankings. Like we're up to number 6 now, which first of all, I think we should be higher than that, but that's another discussion. But Penn State's going to keep going, and I think it's something people should keep their eye out for. Is this how good this Penn State team is?
We're looking for your comments. We are getting spammed actually in the YouTube comments section. So we want this to be a conversation. We want to talk some Penn State football with you on this postgame show. So if you got a thought about Iowa, Ohio State, and Michigan, the Northwestern UMass games, and how Penn State should approach these next 3 weeks, let us know. We are going to share some more thoughts about Iowa and then a brief preview of Northwestern in just a moment. First, let's hear from another one of our sponsors of today's episode, and that is Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for everything: sports, music, theater, comedy, all those events near you. There are a lot of things to like about the Game Time app experience. First, the flash deals and last minute tickets. I know people that use the Game Time app to find their tickets for Beaver Stadium and the Whiteout game. You get those flash deals and last minute tickets only on the Game Time app, exclusive discounts that are made available to you on those tickets. And it's easy to find and buy tickets in your area. And my favorite feature is personally when you're looking at an event and it's like, where am I going to sit? Well, Game Time has the perfect view. So you're not guessing when you're buying those tickets what the view is going to be like and how you're going to enjoy the game. Lowest price guarantee and event cancellation protection as well. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that free account. Redeem promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And Locked On is amping up its college football coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time across all the Locked On College YouTube channels. I've done a segment since Penn State is a college football playoff contender, and that's what the show is devoted to, previewing the weekend slate of games, talking about the college football implications, big college football news, and so much more with the talent that the Locked On Podcast Network has to offer. Again, every Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time across all the Locked On College YouTube channels. And then when the show's finished, you can find it wherever you get your podcast to play it back at your disposal. Zane, I think that really Penn State has taken a step forward. Penn State is able to wear down opponents like they haven't had before. I want to try to summarize this as best as I can. Penn State dominated the likes of an Iowa team that probably 2 years ago definitely would have gave them fits. Like the Iowa team, Penn State is now built to take on opponents like Illinois, like Iowa, in the ways that they haven't been able to before. And that tells me everything I need to know that they are, in fact, a college football playoff contender. This isn't some aspiration. They legitimately could go 12-0 here because I like the way that they match up against Michigan. I like the way that they match up against Ohio State. Penn State is actually strategically built to take on the Buckeyes, which is why I like them. I am more confident than I ever have been that they do beat the Buckeyes in this instant. Michigan, they're a good team, and they are hiding what they have to offer. I don't think they've taken a step back. I really do think that they are also a college football playoff contender as well. Penn State is, but Ohio State, a little bit of a slight. They impressed me, though, with the Notre Dame one. They have impressed me, but Penn State is strategically built to take on the likes of a Ryan Day coached Ohio State team. And now they're better equipped to take on Jim Harbaugh-led Michigan teams. So in this instance, Penn State's schedule breaks perfectly with this 3-week window of they can fine-tune the machine that they are against competition that's not going to threaten you in Northwestern UMass, and you have the bye week in the middle there before you get into the heart of your schedule with the Buckeyes, the Terrapins. I'll throw them in there. The Terrapins are a top 25 team, in my opinion, and the Wolverines. So Penn State has an opportunity to avoid injuries, save plays that they're going to need later on in the season, and get those guys who don't have experience, get them the experience they need.
I think it was just looking at how Penn State utilizes their experience and like preparing guys like Drew Aller. Like this was the whole plan, was to like prep Drew Aller to be in this position.
Right.
But even like KJ Winston had a lot more snaps yesterday, and like I was impressed with that because they need to prep him because like we're like Johnny Dixon next year to the NFL draft, so you gotta get him ready. And Tony Rojas too, getting him more snaps is big for Penn State just to build that depth. And like you said, I also think the Wolverines in Michigan haven't really showed us much. Ohio State, on the other hand, besides Notre Dame, they haven't really been that impressive because like they played Youngstown State and beat them by 20 points. Like they should have beat them by like 30 something. So if they're the same team, but this year I'm not sure yet. So obviously Ohio State was playing Penn State at the same time, so I couldn't watch both games. I have to watch that back. But Penn State, I think, is on a different level than Ohio State this year. Wolverines in Michigan are obviously the toughest game, but I think Penn State can still get by them. It'll be definitely a tough game. It'll be all in the offense and all the defense to see what can happen. And Penn State's only advantage there is that it is a home game. Because otherwise, you play that game in Michigan, that Michigan, I think, could win that game easily too. So it's going to be a big toss-up. So it'll be interesting to see what Penn State decides to do. Both teams haven't showed a lot. It's going to be tough scouting for Franklin and Harbaugh because they don't know what to expect.
Exactly. They're concealing a lot of stuff. Yeah.
So it'll be something that most of their scouting is going to come from watching the first half at halftime, trying to figure out how do we stop McCarthy or how do we stop Drew Aller. That's going to be their biggest discussion because you can't really prepare for a game like that. You just have to keep going off of what you do have and be like, oh, we know McCarthy can run. We know Blake Corum will punch it up the middle. But Penn State can only prepare so much if they pull out some crazy play at the middle of the game, and they're not expecting it. They just have to keep getting their defensive guys repetitions, even the second-string guys, in case something happens. Like you don't want to see like a Curtis Jacobs or a Robinson or an Abdul Carter get injured, but if something happens, you need to be able to turn to somebody, whether that's Tony Rojas or somebody else off the bench, or even just giving Dominic DeLuca more snaps and just being able to trust them is going to be Penn State's biggest opportunity and most important keys going into the next couple of weeks of their toughest part of the season.
And James Franklin has admitted that Penn State, at least at this point in time, is in a position where Trey Wallace played last night, but he certainly wasn't a focal point in the offense. It was Keandre Lambert-Smith. It was the tight ends, right? The tight ends got involved in the passing game, which was great. Theo Johnson had more receiving yards. Tyler Warren caught 2 touchdowns. Drew Aller threw 4 touchdowns in that game. They were able, James Franklin said it after post-practice in the middle of the week, that Amari Evans and Trey Wallace were available, but we don't have to use them because they're not 100%. We want them to be 100%, but Penn State's in a position where not only can they conceal those plays, but they can conceal the players too. They don't have to force guys into, they can bench Olu Fashanu halfway through the game if they want. And I know that was Delaware, right? They did that with Delaware, with Norzad and Fashanu. But Trey Wallace doesn't need to be on the field, and they need him, but they need him. They will need him for Ohio State, and they will need him for Michigan. So Penn State is playing the long game with all of that. Now, I think that should put a lid on Iowa 31-0. They got to figure it out with Brian Ferentz because the defense is really good, but Iowa's not going to be. They could win the Big Ten West, and Penn State could hypothetically see Iowa again. And I think Penn State, the Penn State team that we know is coming, but we just don't. Most people don't know how great this team is. That one that could hypothetically make a Big Ten championship would absolutely embarrass the likes of Wisconsin and Iowa. Northwestern, they got to go through them next week. Penn State is actually currently a 26-point favorite. Our thoughts on them in just a second, but a word from DoorDash. Do you love the convenience of getting what you want right to your door? With DoorDash grocery delivery, you can stock up for the week or order last-minute cravings conveniently. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that actually delivers. With thousands of grocery stores to choose from, you'll find the best in your neighborhood and boost your local economy with each and every order. You'll get exactly what you ordered, or we're going to make it right. So sit back and enjoy quality groceries just like you picked them out yourself. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. Limited time offer, terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Locked On Nittany Lions is your go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Penn State rivals. Check them out. Dylan coming over to help us out on the live post-game show in the first segment. HappyValleyInsider.com talking Penn State football. And now recruiting in the mix as well. Before we get to Northwestern, we got another comment on the live post-game show. Again, we want to hear from you. And Josh says, great win by Penn State last night against an offenseless Hawkeyes. I like that terminology. CBS Sports did a decent job of covering the whiteout game, which Fox Sports would have marketed it more than CBS Sports. That's true, but Fox they are hell-bent on putting that game at noon. And I've had episodes and podcasts about this. The everydayers, I hope you're tuned in, and maybe some people will be able to say this in the comments, but Penn State does not want to white out at 12 o'clock, 3:30. It needs to be at night, and it needs to be earlier in the season because look what happened. I'm surprised that the attendance was as good as it was, but just imagine instead of rain and upper 50s, maybe low 60s, you get 30s, snow, or just that cold, frigid rain. It doesn't even have to be snow. It just has to be that nasty. It has to be that nasty rain. Not a lot of people are going to go to that game. Okay. So Penn State strategically wants that game at night because the whiteout just pops in the nighttime atmosphere. Okay. Everybody's dressed in white and it just has that bright feeling in a darker aura. But also the weather's a factor and then opponent. Okay. Penn State wants Michigan ideally to be the whiteout game, but that's in November and you can't predict the weather to that point out. You just assume that it's going to be bad and frigid. And Fox, the network, who, like I said, is adamant that they put the primetime games for their season, for their broadcast season at noon. Penn State's not going to put a whiteout at noon. They've done the afternoon whiteouts before. They're not doing it again. Pat Kraft, James Franklin are not doing that. So it's going to be a nighttime. It depends on who the opponent is, the weather, and when they kick that game off and what network ultimately picks it up. And since Fox wants to put it at noon, then that's on them. So Penn State just simply won't do business. Another comment from Josh. Appreciate the conversation here. Josh says Penn State got really good last year when they implemented the tight ends more. So I hope it opens up the Penn State offense approach this year. The next 2 games are all about running the ball at will against Northwestern. Brenton Strange offered a lot more value than I think we gave him credit for. Brenton Strange is actually really good at blocking. Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren, I think there's a little bit of a misconception here. I am not a fan of Theo Johnson as a blocker. I think when he moves on to the NFL, he's going to be purely a wide tight end. Because Penn State right now is in a position where they can conceal the playbook, they don't need to open it up as much. Penn State is using Theo Johnson as a blocker when that's just not his game. Can he block? Yes, he has to. He's a tight end. But really, he's a unicorn type of receiver. I think whichever team gets him and is able to implement him in a more comfortable setting with his skill set, Theo Johnson could have a very nice career as an NFL pass-catching tight end. He's just not a blocker. Then with Tyler Warren's okay at blocking. but not to the extent of Brenton Strange would drive people out of the stadium if he could, right? Brenton Strange, the part of the reason there were so many more explosive plays last season has to do that there's a drop off from the wide receiver blocking. There's also a drop off from the tight end blocking, and Brenton Strange was a big part of that. So, yes, the tight ends were utilized more because Brenton Strange was a lot better than we gave him credit for, and that's why the Jacksonville Jaguars selected him in the second round. Josh again says USC will be next year. I totally agree. I think I said that a while ago, because you need content for the off season, right? It's been a while since I've had that discussion, but USC will be the whiteout game. This is my prediction, but it's going to come true. USC will be the whiteout game. It will also be Penn State's first Big Ten home opener in a decade and a half, right? They've been on the road to open up Big Ten play 14 out of the last 15 seasons. Pat Kraft's not going to let that happen again now that he's fully entrenched as the athletic director. They will make USC the whiteout game, and it will be the Big Ten home opener in Beaver Stadium next season for 2024. But now let's talk Northwestern, right? I think I've rambled a lot on the second half of the post-game show. Northwestern coming in. Obviously, they're unranked. This game is going to be in Evanston on Saturday, September 30th. It is a 12 p.m. kickoff, and it will be Penn State is a 26-point favorite. The total is 46.5, and coverage will be brought to you by the Big Ten Network. For Northwestern, they are 2-2. I was just being funny when I said that the win total over under is going to be 0.5. They beat UTEP. That surprisingly enough, they beat Minnesota. That is not a game that PJ Fleck and the Golden Gophers should have lost. I think Minnesota still wins that game 9 times out of 10, but you got to win the game that you don't play it 10 times. It's not like the NBA with series. You got to win the game that you're playing on the football field. Northwestern does play Howard, so they are going to win about 3 games this season. Penn State won't be one of them. Penn State 4-0. 6th in the AP polls. They moved up to number 6. They actually jumped USC because USC, surprising outcome against Arizona State. But that's what really at a base level, what you need to know about Northwestern. Ben Bryant's the starting quarterback, transfer from Cincinnati. David Braun's the head coach, interim. The entire staff is still intact for Northwestern, just minus Pat Fitzgerald. So you still have the Pat Fitzgerald mentality. It's just being expressed through the remaining coaches and the players. But Cam Porter, I think, is a good running back. Like he's talented, but he doesn't have the complementary parts. He doesn't have the offensive line to help him out, the passing game to take off some pressure, the quarterback as well, the defense to be able to get opposing offenses off the field in 3 and outs. Because I like Cam Porter a lot. Him and Evan Hull is a dynamic duo for Northwestern when this team was a little better in a better situation. I hate to see what's going on here. I'm not going to comment on Pat Fitzgerald, but I just don't like to see a Northwestern program that you think is kind of the beacon of standards, and the Wildcats are just in a very low spot right now. But they're doing what they can to fight, and you got to respect the teams that are just going to they'll try to throw the kitchen sink at Penn State because they got nothing to lose except the game, but they're going to lose that game. Penn State should easily win by 4 touchdowns on the road. Even if they do play the backups earlier than that, the backups, if Penn State played its backups, their second and third stringers the whole game, they'd still win the game by 2 touchdowns against this Northwestern team.
I definitely agree with you. The Penn State win by 2 touchdowns with the backups. You put Bo Perbola in, he's gonna probably rush for 2 touchdowns himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Penn State's easily going to win that game because if you look at what Northwestern's doing, their defense is terrible. They gave up 34 points last night to Minnesota. They gave up 38 to Duke. You gave up 24 to Rutgers. Penn State's offense is a lot better than all those teams. Like, yes, Duke is having a better season this year than what they normally do, but Penn State's offense could cover that. You said the total was 46 points. Penn State could score 46 points alone without the help of Northwestern. And I don't know if Northwestern can even score on Penn State. They maybe get 1 garbage touchdown or field goal, maybe late in the game if it's the 3rd, 4th string defense. But I don't see how Northwestern can do anything. Yes, their quarterback had a great game against Minnesota with over 300 passing yards. But we're talking about Penn State's defense. We're not talking about a Minnesota defense. A Minnesota team that was good a few years ago when they beat Penn State, but that's a different Minnesota team. This year, they're going to be lucky if they break 5-6 wins because they don't have the same talent they do. Yes, they still have their quarterback, and he's a decent quarterback, but if you don't have defense, that's not going to do anything. So, yes, Northwestern beat them, but Penn State's going to run through them like a freight train, and Northwestern's not going to know what happened. They're going in there, like you said, they have nothing to lose. They're going to play their hearts out. It is a home game for them, but I just don't think there's anything they can do to prepare themselves at this point in the season after already playing 4 games. And obviously, everybody knows that Penn State hasn't shown their true colors, just like Michigan hasn't. So we had a comment about saying like Penn State might utilize the run game. I think they could utilize the run game, especially early on, just to save Drew Aller from giving up more offensive plays for scouting reports for Michigan. But I don't think there's anything that Northwestern can do to stop Aller or Katron Allen. And I think even if you throw Trey Potts in there too, he's been playing pretty good ball too. So I think all 3 of those guys, and Bo Perbula obviously, are just going to run through Northwestern. And the pass game, maybe we'll have a couple guys break 50 yards, but the running game is going to slam right through them because that's just where the weakness is going to be for Northwestern.
Another comment from Josh. Appreciate the conversation. Northwestern is always a scary place to play in Evanston, Ryan Field. Penn State will play a similar game plan, wearing out the Wildcats like they did against Illinois and Iowa. Yes, that's exactly the case. So Josh is spot on, and I think we all are when we say that Penn State doesn't need to do anything different. They're going to run the same 12 personnel. They can get away with it right now, and it's kind of which way does it break, because what team is going to be best prepared for the unknown? Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan are all going into those games like, whoa, we have not seen the real version of these teams. And I think it's the quarterback. Drew Aller is the obvious difference maker here. We have seen it. We've seen glimpses of it. But Drew Aller is the fact that Penn State will be able to hurt you with the ground game with Singleton and Allen. Again, I think they're being stubborn by running all the inside zone because they're trying to figure it out. Okay, what needs to work with the interior of the offensive line so that we can get better plays out of the middle ground game. But the outside zone is going to be good for Penn State. They're going to drop some better passing plays. It's just different watching Drew Aller with the timing to the sideline to sideline passes. The ball is there when the receiver turns his head around and it's right, accurate. He doesn't have to move. Like Drew Aller, the only time that Drew Aller has thrown like, whoa, why did that ball just completely sail, or where was that one, is because of a simple miscommunication. So other than Penn State cleaning up some communication issues on offense, maybe especially in the passing game, I really don't see any issues. Clean up the inside ground game, the communication issues with the wide receivers, and that will come in time. Dante Cephas is still new. This is still a first-year starting quarterback. I think Penn State is set up very perfectly. I'm thinking something for Northwestern, somewhere in the neighborhood, and these are the games to do it. Clean up the communication, fine-tune those little things so that they're not an issue for Ohio State and Michigan. I'm thinking Penn State wins because I think Penn State can shut out Northwestern. And I'm going to take that back-to-back shutouts. I'm thinking something like maybe a 45-0, 49-0. Like you said, Penn State could put up 40+ points by themselves and cover that total on their own, Zane.
Yeah, just like you said, Penn State is easily going to cover. We've had some comments people have been saying about the Penn State's defense being like one of the best in the nation, and I think it was pretty evident like just yesterday and also a couple weeks ago when they played Delaware, getting 5 turnovers then and getting 2 turnovers yesterday. But the other thing is Penn State, like, they have so many defensive schemes, and Manny Diaz like runs a defense so well that there's also defensive plays that people overlook that Penn State hasn't ran yet. Like when it comes time to play Ohio State, there's plays Manny has ready, prepared just for stopping Marvin Harrison Jr. There's plays that he has just to stop Blake Corum or J.J. McCarthy when they play Michigan. Like people want to say, oh, like the offense, yeah, there's offensive plays that they don't know, but there's defensive plays they don't know either. Same with special teams. I wouldn't be surprised if Penn State throws out some kind of onside kick craziness when they play a Michigan team at home in front of a crowd.
I don't think they need to, though. That's I get what you're saying. Pull out the surprises, and that's what Penn State's going to do. But They're not in a position anymore where they have to fake field goals against Michigan, because I totally get what you're saying, Zane. And I'm not trying to say you're wrong, but they're now in a position where they don't need to do that kind of crazy stuff. So the onside kicks, the fake field goals, because if Penn State made both of their field goals in that Michigan game, I was having that conversation just yesterday at when the Iowa Penn State game was going on. Penn State should have won that game, but they were so desperate to get wins against those top teams. They didn't believe in themselves. They felt like they needed to just totally scrap a game plan when they were good enough. You make both those field goals, Penn State wins 23-21 and ruins Michigan's college football playoff hopes. They are not in a position where they need to do that, because they can win with their base game plan. They will have deviations of it, but not something like, whoa, we got to take a gamble, 100-1 odds type of thing, and really risk it. They don't need to do that. They can win behind Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, this defense, carrying the Nittany Lions to the finish line. And that's nice to know, given what we've seen over 2020 and 2021. I think that's where we should finish it up, Zane, here, is that Penn State is a college football playoff contender. They showed it against Iowa that when they want to turn the jets on, when they want to put the pedal to the metal, they can and they will. And Penn State fans should be pretty excited about what's to come. 12-0 is in the cards. A college football playoff berth is definitely it's not a, well, we're hopeful. No, this is a significant possibility for Penn State. And the schedule opens up in a way that significantly benefits the Nittany Lions, with Northwestern, the bye week, and UMass all leading up to Ohio State. Become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions wherever you get your podcast, and on the YouTube. Follow Zane on X, on Twitter. You can follow myself on X and Twitter. Same thing, the Locked On Nittany Lions podcast. You can follow the show as well. And keep it right here, because more Penn State football content and recruiting news is on the way here on Locked On Nittany Lions.